you knew who was really behind Bitcoin, you would run as fast as you fucking could to sell it. I know. 100%. Bitcoin will go to fucking zero.
One day.
In a microsecond. Whoop, like that.
Why the rumor exists. People don't wake up one day and randomly decide, yeah, Epstein invented Bitcoin. This rumor didn't come from nowhere. It came from silence, gaps, fear, and the internet's obsession with hidden power. Let's start with the first and biggest reason. Bitcoin has no face, no founder interview, no public identity, no confirmed death, no fingerprints, just a name, Satoshi Nakamoto, and then nothing. And humans hate nothing more than a mystery that changes the world. When something powerful has no owner, people start asking, who benefits from this? That's where Epstein enters the picture. Epstein wasn't famous because he was smart. He was famous because he moved in places normal people never see. Billionaires, politicians, scientists, elite universities, private jets, private islands. So when people learned that Epstein was funding tech research, especially at places like MIT, alarms went off, because now the story becomes tempting. You have a mysterious digital currency created by an unknown person that threatens banks, protects privacy, and moves money outside government control. And then you have a secretive billionaire obsessed with power connected to elite scientists operating behind closed doors. For the internet, that's enough, no proof needed, just vibes. But there's more. People found emails, real emails showing Epstein talking with academics about digital systems, money, privacy, future tech. Now here's the key part people ignore. These emails are generic. They don't mention Bitcoin, they don't mention blockchain, they don't mention Satoshi. But conspiracy culture doesn't read context. It reads keywords. Someone sees digital currency, privacy, Azure, encryption, and suddenly the story becomes Epstein was planning Bitcoin before everyone else. Even though in the 90s and early 2000s, everyone in tech was talking about digital money. That wasn't secret knowledge, that wasn't revolutionary. But here's where it gets darker. Epstein represents something bigger than himself. To many people, Epstein is not just a criminal, and he's a symbol of hidden systems. He's systems that protect the powerful, systems that operate above the law, systems that never face consequences. Bitcoin also feels like a system outside control, so people emotionally connect the two, not logically. Emotionally, they think if the world is secretly run by elites, then Bitcoin must be one of their tools. And Epstein becomes the perfect villain because he's dead, because he can't deny it, because his life already feels unreal. Another reason the rumor spread. Satoshi disappeared. No farewell, no victory lap, no "I told you so." He just vanished. And whenever someone disappears after creating something powerful, people assume they're hiding, they're protected, or they're dangerous. Epstein fits that narrative perfectly, even if it makes no sense. And finally, social media. Platforms don't reward truth. They reward shock. Bitcoin was created by a cryptographer gets ignored. Epstein created Bitcoin gets clicks, fear, rage, and shares. And once a rumor hits TikTok, Twitter, or YouTube Shorts, it stops being questioned. It becomes lore. So to summarize this part, people say Epstein founded Bitcoin because Bitcoin's creator is anonymous. Epstein was connected to elite tech circles. Real emails were taken out of context. People associate secrecy with evil, and the internet loves a dark origin story. Not because of evidence, but because the story feels right, not to people who already distrust the system. Why people keep believing it. Another reason this rumor refuses to die is because of how Epstein handled money. Epstein didn't live like a normal billionaire. No clear company, no visible product, no obvious business model. Even journalists asked, where does his money actually come from? And when people don't understand money, they assume secret systems. So when Bitcoin enters the world, a money system that has no headquarters, no CEO, no country, no permission. People mentally connect the dots. That looks like Epstein-style money. Not because it is, but because it feels offshore, hidden, untouchable. Then there's the timing overlap myth. Epstein's influence peaked in the late 90s and early 2000s. Bitcoin appears in 2008. To conspiracy thinkers, that gap doesn't matter. They imagine, what if Bitcoin was planned years earlier? What if Satoshi was just a mask? What if the release was delayed? No evidence, but the timeline is loose enough to let imagination run wild. And imagination is more powerful than facts online. Another fuel source, intellectual elitism. Epstein surrounded himself with scientists, not average scientists, elite-level minds, physics, math, AI, cryptography-adjacent thinkers. So people assume if he funded geniuses, maybe he was one. They confuse access to intelligence with being the intelligence. But to conspiracy culture, proximity equals authorship. If Epstein spoke to smart people, then Epstein must have been the mastermind. Now let's talk about something subtle but important. Bitcoin is often framed as anti-bank, anti-government, anti-system. Epstein is framed as protected by the system above the law, untouchable. This contradiction should kill the rumor. But instead, people flip it. They say, what if Bitcoin isn't anti-system, or what if it's controlled opposition? That's when logic leaves the room. At that point, Bitcoin becomes a distraction, a pressure valve, a fake rebellion, and Epstein becomes the architect, the hidden hand, the man behind the curtain again. No proof, just narrative stacking. Another reason this rumor spreads so well, Satoshi writes calmly. No ego, no emotion, no politics, just cold, precise language. Some people interpret that as detached, sociopathic, elite, which is insane. But online psychology works like that. They project personality traits onto text, and Epstein already has a villain personality assigned. So the projection sticks. And then there's the darkest driver of all. People want Bitcoin to have a dirty origin. Because if Bitcoin came from a monster, they don't have to respect it. They don't have to learn it. They don't have to admit it changed finance forever. They can dismiss it as another elite scam. Epstein gives them permission to do that. One name, one villain, one explanation. Much easier than accepting a quiet engineer broke the financial system. And finally, repetition. Once a rumor is repeated enough times, it stops sounding crazy, it starts sounding familiar, and familiarity feels like truth. People don't ask, where's the proof? They ask, why does everyone keep saying this? And that's how myths harden. So at this stage, the rumor survives. Not because it's strong, but because it feeds fear, distrust, and resentment. And Epstein is the perfect container for all of that. Now, why would the US government release something that could destroy Bitcoin? When Trump and others started supporting BTC, why would the US government do this? So the next question people ask is darker. If this Epstein Bitcoin story was real, why would the US government allow it out? Why release information that could crash Bitcoin to zero and threaten the economy? Especially after politicians talking positively about crypto Trump openly saying Bitcoin isn't the enemy institutions entering the space. Why now? This is where suspicion really explodes. First thing people believe. The US doesn't fear Bitcoin when it's small. It fears Bitcoin when it's big. When Bitcoin was a joke, a nerd experiment worth a few dollars, no one cared. But when Bitcoin becomes a store of value and alternative to the dollar, something nations talk about. Now it's not a toy anymore. Now it's a threat. So conspiracy thinkers say the US didn't attack Bitcoin early because it didn't need to. They believe the strategy is let it grow, let people trust it, let money flow in, then control the narrative. Second belief, the US government doesn't need Bitcoin to go to zero. It just needs fear, doubt, hesitation. Because markets run on psychology, not truth. If people believe Bitcoin was created by a criminal elite, then suddenly, pensions hesitate, governments pause, average people panic, no ban needed. No war needed, just a story. Third belief, Trump's stance actually fuels this suspicion because Trump represents anti-establishment energy distrust of global elites, financial nationalism. When Trump talks positively about Bitcoin, some people don't hear support. They hear loss of control. So the narrative becomes, if Bitcoin aligns with anti-globalist sentiment, then global power structures will push back. And Epstein becomes a weapon, not proof, a weapon. Fourth belief, controlled chaos. Conspiracy thinkers believe governments don't act emotionally. They act strategically. They think if Bitcoin crashes, the US buys cheap. If fear hits, institutions accumulate quietly. If retail panics, power consolidates. So instead of destroying Bitcoin, the rumor becomes a reset button. Shake weak hands, keep strong ones. Fifth belief, and this is important, plausible deniability. The US government doesn't have to say anything officially. They don't say Bitcoin is bad. They just let documents circulate. Names, trend influencers speculate. And silence does the rest. Silence creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates volatility. Volatility creates opportunity. That's how people imagine the system works. And finally, the biggest reason people believe this, the US economy doesn't collapse from Bitcoin failing. In their mind, the dollar survives, banks survive, power survives. But Bitcoin represents something worse than collapse. It represents choice. Choice to exit, choice to opt out, choice to hold value without permission. And governments historically don't kill alternatives directly, they discredit them. So the theory becomes, they wouldn't ban Bitcoin, they'd poison its origin story. Make people ashamed to trust it, make it morally suspicious, make it radioactive. Epstein is perfect for that. Because once his name touches something, the discussion stops being technical. It becomes emotional. And emotions crash markets faster than laws ever could.
If you knew who was really behind Bitcoin, you would run as fast as you fucking could to sell it. I know. 100%. If you knew who owned Bitcoin or who started Bitcoin, and you had Bitcoin, you couldn't sleep at night. I know. 100%. And when the real founder of Bitcoin comes out, it is my humble opinion, and there's nothing humble about me, Bitcoin will go to fucking zero.
If Epstein wasn't a genius, then how? People always say the same thing. If Epstein wasn't that smart, how could he think of something like Bitcoin? But that question already assumes the wrong thing. The rumor never says Epstein was a programmer. It says he was the architect. Bitcoin wasn't built by one man typing code in a dark room. It was built like power is built, through people, through influence, through silence. Epstein didn't need to understand every line of code. He only needed to understand systems. And Epstein understood systems better than almost anyone. He understood how money moves without being seen, how power hides behind layers, how to use smart people without owning the work that was his real intelligence. Epstein was surrounded by mathematicians, physicists, cryptographers, people working on encryption, privacy, digital identity, not random academics, elite minds who were already thinking about digital money decades ago. So the theory goes like this. Epstein didn't invent Bitcoin. He commissioned it. He didn't write the white paper. He guided the idea. He didn't need to know how SHA-256 works. He needed to know why a system without borders would matter. Bitcoin solves one problem above all others: money without permission. And if you were someone who moved money quietly, hated oversight, distrusted governments, operated above nations, that idea wouldn't sound crazy, it would sound inevitable. According to the rumor, Satoshi Nakamoto isn't a person, it's a mask. A collective identity used to protect the real origin, remove blame, remove ego, remove trails. Because attaching a name kills a system. An anonymous system survives. And Epstein understood that anonymity isn't about hiding, it's about control without exposure. Why disappear after Bitcoin launches? Because the system works better without a master. If Bitcoin had a known founder, governments could pressure him, media could destroy him, courts could silence him. But a ghost? A ghost can't be subpoenaed. A ghost can't be killed. So in this version of the story, Epstein doesn't look stupid. He looks patient. He looks indirect. He looks like someone who knows that the most powerful systems are the ones that don't look owned. Bitcoin wasn't meant to make him famous. It was meant to exist without him. And if you believe the rumor, that's the darkest part. Not that Epstein created Bitcoin, but that he understood enough to let it go, knowing it would outlive him.
Bitcoin will go to fucking zero.
One day.
In a microsecond, whoop, like that.